is that it's messy. The beauty of it is that it's a journey. The beauty of it is that it's a process. The beauty of it is that we have to ask ourselves questions over the course of our development. Is how I'm living my life working for me or against me to achieve my goals? And we have to check in with other people, like our partners and our friends and our kids and whoever else and our colleagues. And I hate to say that, but the people who, are dying for the correct strategy, there is no correct strategy. I worked as a fitness instructor for 10 years of my life while I taught martial arts. I saw so many people use exercise as a way to escape their reality. They just were on the treadmill for 10 hours a day with an eating disorder who were just thinking this is, my healthy strategy, and they were ruining their lives. The same thing with food, the same thing with you can trick yourself into believing things. The goal of this work is to help people pause, consider ideas, and then you have to go back and say, how is my life? How are my relationships? How's my work going? Et cetera. And that's where the real beauty comes out of the learning.
I'm checking back into my developmental biases as a way to ask questions that I hope are relevant to everyone, and now especially. And one of the things that I've observed is that there seems to be a broadening of the contexts in which broader ranges of emotions are allowed. Online is a really good example of all of it, right? And I think that the judgments about, well, this person is losing their cool, and someone say, well, so-and-so stepped in front of his motorcycle, for instance. These are the debates that reflect all these developmental biases. And in some cases, there's a legal line. And those legal channels, by the way, are very interesting. There's a great channel. It's a little too Hollywood because the guy worked in Hollywood, but he's a lawyer, and it's called The Legal Beef. I don't know him. But he does these everyday cases of someone says it's illegal to film here, you can't touch my camera, or, and he goes, well, that's The Legal Beef, tells you, and he gives you exactly what the law says. And so I think we tend to like that. I certainly like that.
Sure.
I like thick black lines, clear operational definitions. But it is true that, for instance, growing up, I wasn't of the mind that, it's not okay to cry. But it was definitely certain places, certain times.
Yeah.
It does seem like the workplace and school and online, it's become either more accepted or it just happens that people are bringing more of their own stuff. And I think one thing I worry about, I'm showing my age here, but the one thing that I worry about as people think about their emotions without having really good strategies to work with them is that they lose the ability to be effective.
I agree.
Because time is running. And I hear from a fair number of friends whose kid is struggling because they're dealing with depression, or they're dealing with anxiety, or they have a cannabis use disorder, or time's ticking. And developmental milestones are real. And so the question I have is, how should people think about evolving their own ability to work with their emotions? Because you said it's a process, it's a dance, it takes time, with the need to really show up and get things done in life.
Yeah.
Because you and I are two people who are degreed and have steady jobs, and we have space to think about this stuff.
Well, we do. And I always tell people that, for example, there's a school, I won't mention its name because this is not a good story, post the election, this past election, wrote a note to every student and said, we recognize that some of you may be feeling overwhelmed by your feelings, and if you need to take the day off, it's okay. I almost had a conniption about that. That's my father speaking, conniption. But I was like, I cannot believe this is happening. They weren't a school that I work with. I wanted to call the head of that school and say, this is the worst advice you can give people. People have to learn how to live with difficult feelings. And if we're going to give excuses to people to they can just I'm so overwhelmed by what's happened, and not be able to process it and manage it and move forward in their life, we're going to create a generation of very weak people. So I couldn't agree more. And that's not what this work is about. That's the confusion. It's been politicized in many ways sometimes, and there's groups of people now that say you're making kids fragile by having them talk about their feelings. And I say it's called emotional intelligence, emotion regulation. We're not letting them sit in their feelings all day long. We want them to recognize, is that feeling helping or hurting them achieve their goals? If it's getting in the way, you need to strategize. And the goal is to move forward, not to be stuck in. I think that's a huge, huge issue right now. And the same thing with discomfort. Like, it's okay to be uncomfortable. I mean, my whole career is built upon being uncomfortable. People saying, I don't like your work. Your program's going to turn kids into homosexuals. I don't want to talk about feelings. You're this.
I'm no psychologist, but you recreated your childhood with the public.
Yeah, there you go. Sublimated. But, I love that feeling, that discomfort. I sit with it. I don't try to push it away. And I think, Marc, what's your creative solution? That to me is like the beauty of the work. I don't get it. If I just got paralyzed, by that, where would I go in life? I would be frozen. We don't want kids to be frozen. We don't want anyone to be frozen. We want people to be able to live their lives, experience the full range of emotions, regulate effectively, and achieve their goals.
I'm no psychologist. I've said that 4 times. But I have the strong feeling that your martial arts training prepared you to be public facing, because it is a relationship, right? And I'd like to talk a little bit about that relationship specifically, because you've been this amazing ambassador for emotions, what they are, how to work with them in a healthy way, and to also still show up in life, to not necessarily take the day off, right? I mean, if you lose a close family member, we would all say, like, of course, stay home, take a day, take what you need, right? But eventually come back. That's an important piece too. It's an important piece too, to not, as one scientist I used to work with say, dissolve into a puddle. He used to say, when someone's paper came back, he said, and if it gets, before you look, if it gets rejected, don't dissolve into a puddle of your own tears. Yes. It was that kind of old school, harsh thing. But I think it came from a place of care, because you're like, listen, it's not the end of the world. And there have been graduate students who've killed themselves on the basis of their PhD not going well. I know stories about this, sadly. You have taken some heat for both being a champion of this process, but also by not giving in to this idea that we're all just supposed to take the decade off.
Yeah.
And so you get it from both sides. You're in a unique position.
Yeah.
And I feel for you, because some people will say, hey, listen, you're teaching people to be soft. And clearly that's not what you're advocating for. And people have also said, hey, you're pushing us to push our feelings away. And there's a lot that we're really angry about in the world. And how can you be talking about this when fascism is taking over, there's a war, and on and on and on and on and on. So how have you, just personally, if you're willing, how has that landed, and how have you decided to respond to that? I
love challenge. And so, I wrote this piece for Time magazine. And of course, you probably know this, but when you write an op-ed, the publisher decides on the title, and they like to be provocative. So they called it the overreaction epidemic. And I got slammed for it. Overreaction, we're not overreacting. The world's coming to an end. And it does feel like, for many of us, between wars and everything else happening, political polarization, it does feel that way for many on both sides. And I say, yes, but running around yelling and screaming at people, how is that helpful? Like, where is the benefit to you and to the other person to move forward? And so, to me, it just makes me think more creatively about the work I do. And the other side, where people have said that I'm now making people fragile because I'm getting kids and boys to talk about their feelings, and it's going to make them more fragile. As a matter of fact, I saw somebody said recently that this work causes kids to have mental illness. And I was like, wow, that's a good one. And again, this stems from misunderstanding of the concepts. I'm a big stickler, like you said, operational definitions. I want to be super clear about what I'm teaching. I'm not teaching la, 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 la. I'm teaching you how to be emotionally self-aware. Would you agree that it matters to be clear about what you're feeling?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. So when you're clear about how you're feeling, and if that feeling is disrupting you from being a good student or being a good partner or being a good manager leader, do you think that you should use techniques to help you figure out how to manage it?
Yes, absolutely.
Perfect. That's what we teach. It's really clear. When you have conceptual clarity, I think there's less confusion. Mm-hmm. What happens is that people It's gotten politicized. It's confusing around going back to what we spoke about earlier, that this is obsessive checking in. This is prying into kids' personal lives. Here's the deal. A kid comes to school with feelings. We all have feelings from the moment we wake up in the morning to the time we go to bed at night, even when we sleep. Have you ever been irritable in the morning?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And have you ever noticed that we call it incidental leakage? It's not a great term, but like you're irritable, you really haven't processed it, and you get maybe to the studio here, and then maybe people are trying to interact with you, and you're not like the best version of you.
Definitely.
Yeah. That's what happens. And so that happens to a kid who's gotten bullied on the bus or had a fight at home, and you want that kid, like every parent does, I want my kid to be a good learner, have good friends, etc. All right. So now I'm teaching you a process, Andrew, that before you walk into the studio, I want you to take 30 seconds, maybe 20 if you get good at it, to just check in. Take a breath. How are you feeling? Gosh, I'm pissed off at that phone call I had, or I'm annoyed at this. Okay. How do you want to be seen and talked about and experienced in that studio today? Oh, wow. It's a whole, do you see how even saying that, it makes you stand still and reflect? Well, I'm going to be this cool dude who's, compassionate and creative. Okay. Well, what do you need to get there? And then you walk in, and all of a sudden you have attributed the emotion to its actual cause, which is that stupid phone call, whatever happened, and you're no longer going to displace that or project it or take it out on somebody else. Do you think that would be a useful process for kids, couples, leaders to use?
Definitely.
How long did it take?
Seconds.
There you go. This is not obsession with feeling. This is not, this is at opportune moments. When I come home from work, I work long hours and I'm tired and I'm irritable a lot of the time. I just am. I got to switch my mindset to be the best version of myself as a husband. So that's what we're trying to help people do. And I don't want people to be confused by that. I want people to be I want real clarity. It's articulating what your experience is, recognizing that it may be helpful. If it's helpful, you got nothing to do. Congratulations. If it's not going to be helpful, you need to think about those strategies. Is it labeling it? Maybe. Is it taking the breath? Maybe. There have been times I've taken 15 deep breaths and I'm still irritable. I need a new strategy. I need to call a good friend and just say, hey, Doug, can you I'm really struggling with this right now. You got some thoughts? Not a problem. Getting social support is not weak. It's smart. Maybe I need to take another walk around the block to just decompress. Maybe I got a really shitty night's sleep and I just need to recognize that I'm never going to be the best version of myself, no matter how hard I try, because I haven't replenished, the resources of my brain to be the best version of myself.
It's an unfortunate reality, but tap water often contains contaminants that negatively impact our health. In fact, a 2020 study by the Environmental Working Group estimated that more than 200 million Americans are exposed to PFAS chemicals, also known as forever chemicals, through drinking of tap water. These forever chemicals are linked to serious health issues, such as hormone disruption, gut microbiome disruption, fertility issues, and many other health problems. The Environmental Working Group has also shown that over 122 million Americans drink tap water with high levels of chemicals known to cause cancer. It's for all these reasons that I'm thrilled to have Rora as a sponsor of this podcast. I've been using the Rora countertop system for almost a year now. Rora's filtration technology removes harmful substances, including endocrine disruptors and disinfection byproducts, while preserving beneficial minerals like magnesium and calcium. It requires no installation or plumbing. It's built from medical-grade stainless steel, and its sleek design fits beautifully on your countertop. In fact, I consider it a welcome addition to my kitchen. It looks great, and the water is delicious. If you'd like to try Rora, you can go to rora.com/Huberman and get an exclusive discount. Again, that's Rora, RORRA.com/Huberman. I love it. And I've two reflections I'd love your reflections on. The first one is positive states and emotions that are also dangerous. When people are feeling over-affiliative, over-comfortable, they sometimes say things that get them into real trouble. They either disclose things or they make jokes that later they pay the price for. This is, I think, maybe not as common as anger and sadness and anxiety, but given that some very prominent, very, very smart people I've seen completely destroy their careers by, it used to be called tweeting. You go, well, this is crazy. This person, actually a chair of psychiatry, I'm not going to beat around the bush here, was fired for saying something that was totally, it was actually inappropriate and lame and stupid. And you just go, but this person is clearly intelligent. They're the chair of a Ivy League school in psychiatry. And you say, well, what happened? And what was interesting to me were the tweets leading up to it. You could say he was showing his true self, but there was this sort of like ease and comfort around joking. And there's certain jokes you just don't make. And so I think what you're describing is equally important for not overstepping, not, hurting oneself or other people.
Activation is activation. So your heart rate and your, different chemicals get released when you're super excited and when you're anxious. Activation might be the same. The psychology of it is different, right? One is like anticipation of like positive things. One is anticipation of, the negative things. And of course, emotions drive our thinking, our decision-making, everything. So, how many of us have made a mistake when we were too excited when we were young? We won't go into those stories now. Excitement without regulation is not helpful. It's funny because you tell that, and going back to the school situation in a minute, that's a big problem with a lot of teachers. They're like, the kid is so excited, they're going to see grandma after school and they can't stop talking about it all day long and it's driving me crazy. So positive emotions can be a pain in the butt too. But they're afraid that they don't want to squelch the kid's excitement. And I say, well, let's talk about it. What do you think? I mean, this is like the easiest solution I came up with on the spot. I said, what's the challenge? He can't stop talking about going to see his grandmother. I said, well, he must love his grandmother. That's a great thing. Have you given him an opportunity to stand up in the front of the class to just tell everybody how excited he is and just let it get it out? What do you mean? You want me to give him the throne? I said, yeah, I want you to try this out. I want you to let him, when he's like, blah, 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 he can't stop talking about it, I want you to say, Johnny, I'm going to give you a minute to get up and tell everybody how excited you are, but then we're going to go back to math. We're going to go back to science. And let me know how that works. And of course, 2 weeks later, I go back and visit. She's like, you're a magician. I'm like, I'm not a magician. He just needed an outlet for his emotions. Give the kid the 1 minute to just tell everybody how excited he is, but also let him know that the expectations that I have for you are not changing. Just because you're excited about going to see grandma doesn't mean you have to focus. That's the magic of the work.
Be a channel, not a dam.
There you go.
I didn't make that up. I learned that when I was a camp counselor in Yosemite. You get a kid that, back then we didn't have concepts of ADHD.
Yeah.
You got a kid that back then you would just be like, oh, this kid he's out of control. He wasn't harming him, he was just like would not settle down. You can't like just say, hey, sit down. Or, that kid would always be getting in trouble, get sent home. So you give them an opportunity to do something, but then you have to let them settle down. Likewise for the kid that was more creative and less physical, if your entire bunk was a bunch of kids who were super physical, that always would happen. But then you find out this kid was had something of value to share with the other kids, and then it would establish his place in this group. There's a very weird thing happening lately online, which is this obsession with the 90s. I grew up in the 90s, so a teen in the 90s.
Whitney Houston.
And there's an example that I saw recently that I think is really relevant to what you're describing. It was a picture of a classroom sitting around listening to a radio. I remember doing this. It was an actual picture, and it said, when the Challenger space shuttle blew up, we all listened to it with our teachers because we were listening to that space shuttle launch. And then afterwards, we went back to our lesson plan. We didn't process it for weeks and weeks. And someone said, gosh, I miss the 90s. Now, at my school is a little bit different. I actually remember the teacher going around the room the next day and asking people if they had anything they wanted to share. And people would share their thoughts. And then one kid said, I heard they found a foot, and then she was like, okay, Garrett, settle down. Some kids were being a bit morbid and stuff. Maybe she shouldn't have done that. I don't know. But there was an opportunity. But I think that was the last it was ever discussed. And we witnessed with our ears, it's not the same as seeing it, but we witnessed with our ears a bunch of people blowing up. And it was true. It was like, okay, this happened. This is tragic.